Hello, everybody. I'm Alan Gross with GSM. On behalf of Congruent Solutions, I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion, Technology Trends Changing the Retirement Plan Industry. Conversation today is largely between four industry experts who themselves are encountering, well, many of the same challenges you are in driving organizations further to be more successful, more competitive, and serve their mission of helping employers and their employees, of course, achieve better retirement outcomes. As time permits in this session, we're going to try to touch on 5 topics: cybersecurity, AI and machine learning, blockchain and its potential, social media integration, and very importantly, customer experience. We may not give equal time, to each of these topics in the discussion here, but we do intend to touch on all of them as we can, because we appreciate you may have interest on any or all of them. You may have questions about how they relate to your organization and your path. So to that end, if you have questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists or all of them, I'd ask you to please put them in the Q&A window, and we'll do our very best to incorporate them into the flow of this chat. We also have an opportunity at the end of the session to talk once again in a formal Q&A at the end. If for any reason we're not able to address your thoughts directly here, then we will do our very best to follow up by email with all attendees with a post-session message on those kinds of things. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to our fearless four. Michele Steele, Vice President of Customer Experience at OneAmerica. Jamie McInnes, President and CEO of Oculus Partners. Anu Mandava, Application Architecture Practice Leader at CUNA Mutual. Chandrasekaran, Vaidyanathan, affectionately known by colleagues and friends as VC, the Chief Strategy Officer for Congruent. Welcome to you all. When we invited all of you to register for this event, we asked you, a couple of questions. We're going to get to them, but I want you to understand up front that we know that we've all attended panel discussions, whether in person or on the web, that often felt more like a series of monologues than it did a discussion. And our goal here is to really make this a live chat. So we intend to be a bit less formal and let this discussion flow. So for starters, rather than recite the very impressive resumes of each of our distinguished guests, I'd like to begin by asking each of them to spend a few seconds with you and tell us where their passion for this chat comes from and where they'd like to drive it. Jamie, if I can call on you, would you kick us off?
At Oculus Partners, we work with a variety of clients, many across obviously the institutional retirement space, and all of them are facing very similar challenges. So, but at the end of the day, the passion that I have relative to the technology components relative to the delivery of services is somewhat twofold, right? I think that all the providers have been challenged ultimately in terms of how can the technology be utilized to accomplish two things: to get participants or employees who may not be participating to engage and to utilize the retirement services their employers are providing to them, and to use them meaningfully. And I think that what we're seeing over the last few years is really going to enable that meaningfully going forward. And I think some of the topics that we've listed out there are going to be big contributors to them. And the other part is in terms of reducing the costs, bending the cost curve relative to providing those services. So a lot of the providers are fundamentally dealing with some legacy technology stacks. They're dealing with processes that have been put in place maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I'm really hopeful that the technology will enable the providers to drive the cost down. Some of that will be passed on to, obviously, their clients. But I'm also hoping that what that does is allows enough providers to find it economically meaningful to stay in the business and to have a strong competitive set of differentiated providers in the marketplace. And I think the technology will help to enable that as well.
Michele, if you would, tell us about your passion.
Thanks, Alan. So my passion is really focused around creating the next level of experiences for all of our customers, our participants, plan sponsors, advisors, and our own associates fall into that category as well. I've had an interesting line to the work that I'm doing now around leading our customer experience journeys for OneAmerica, in that I lived most of my career in IT. So the exciting thing for me is I get to marry those two up as we move forward, and thinking about these experiences that we want to create for these stakeholder groups that we have in front of us. All of us have our own experiences every day in dealing with companies like Amazon, Disney, Apple, Starbucks. And all of those interactions that we have every day influence now the interactions that we want to have within financial services and retirement. So as we start to look at financial wellness becoming more pervasive, and connections to life products and wellness beverage benefits are going to continue to converge. And I think that's where the sweet spot of digital transformation and technology can really come to play in giving us a different view of our customers and the needs and the wants that they have, and those products and services that are important for them as they go on their retirement journey. And that, we're going to be in a unique position to deliver for them as we move forward.
Thank you. Anu, how are we doing? Let's talk about your passion.
Yes, thank you. At CUNA Mutual, we provide retirement solutions to small and mid-sized companies. As part of that, my passion particularly is in applying technology to create business outcomes. And having grown up in India, I think financial stability was a key thing growing up. And so I'm very happy to be working in an industry where we are able to provide those solutions. Again, specifically, as we look at technology and the advancements that are happening and the need to be available, have quick solutions available rather quickly, there is an increased pressure of cybersecurity, right? As we create more things, the assets are continuing to grow within the retirement space, and that also exposes us to significant cybersecurity risk. At the same time, similar to, I think, what Jamie talked about, where we look at the cost of operating our platforms, we need to continuously bring it down, and leveraging automation and AI to help through those challenges is a key solution that we are applying. And to me, I think there is, in today's world, customer experience, anything that the customer sees in, doesn't matter which app, they think that is the best thing, and they expect that of every other experience, right? So I think, like Michele was talking about, the discerning of experience tied to a particular product doesn't exist anymore. So I think it is quite interesting to see how you balance that cybersecurity plus the cost of an experience, plus continuing to reduce the cost of your operations. So it's an interesting dynamic that we're wrestling with, and have had some good success. So glad to share that with this group.
Anu, thank you so much. VC, you have mentored many in this industry. As a co-founder of Congruent and as a chief strategy officer, tell us where your passion comes from and where that drives your focus.
So, I mean, actually, at Congruent, we are a specialist organization. We are purely focused on the retirement industry in the US, particularly the DC retirement industry, with products and services. And I myself actually have nearly 30 years of experience, out of which more than half has been in the benefits area, building products for the benefits administration. And at Congruent, we specialize on the retirement side. So I've been actually driving key areas on how to leverage technology to build and give exceptional experience to users, as well as improving operational efficiency, which is, I think, with the cost pressures at the provider and servicing end, how do we actually drive this? So some of the interesting areas where we spend a lot of time or invested is in one of the areas is in the artificial intelligence with machine learning and deep learning. We've had some of real good successes with application of that for the retirement domain, particularly on the contribution side. And similarly, we actually have a technology demonstrator for the blockchain, which perhaps we can address it as we go along during the webinar today. And last but not the least, I think one of the most important things, this industry being, heavily, industry where the technology has been actually fast changing, and it's the platforms have been aging. And also if you look at the massive users, there is a big tectonic shift happening with the mobile phones getting into the hands of the people and the applications that they're using. The usability grammar itself has undergone a vast change. Therefore, actually, one of the interesting areas where I spend a lot of time is in terms of really trying to make it like an Amazon or iPhone experience for the retirement industry for a cross-section of the users.
Thank you so much for that. To those of you joining us, when you registered for this event, we asked you to weigh in on a couple of questions that pertain to the focus of this chat today. I'd like to jumpstart the conversation by kind of showing you what the collected response was, and I'd like to present that to our panelists to kind of move us right into the conversation from there. So I'm going to we asked you the question, what is the top technology challenge facing your company today? We asked that in the form of an open question. It was just a blank box. We got lots and lots of different kinds of answers, but in the form of this kind of a word cloud, automation came up a lot, security came up, e-signature came up, signature payroll integration, cybersecurity, of course, payment processing, modernization, data management. A lot of the things, of course, that speak to broadly to the vocabulary of what we're all talking about. It also says that I think that we're facing issues that are obviously somewhat complex. We're also saying that we have a broad cross-section, I think, of interested parties weighing in here. And I'd like to ask our panelists very quickly, without getting into great details, what does the picture of this say to you in terms of what the industry is facing today? Jamie, back to you.
In terms of the picture, I mean, automation coming up, I think, is unfortunately something that all the providers out there are seeking to achieve. They're recognizing that continuing to offer these services in the cost structures that they have, given the fee compression that's happening in the industry, is requiring automation at a greater degree in order to stay competitive, or at least in order to maintain what margins they can on the business. And so I can see that as being, in terms of the word cloud that you presented, as being the number one. And it doesn't surprise me that indeed is the biggest issue, because if you can't make money in the industry, then you can't deliver an experience either, right? So, yeah. And you need to free up funds, and a lot of providers are thinking about this in terms of, how do I apply my technology to reduce costs that then allows me to take that money and those savings and invest in the experience. And they're trying to do both things at the same time. But not surprising to see the automation and the need for machine learning, AI, et cetera, and those types of tools to sort of drive some of that work through is going to be very, very high in people's priorities. So not overly surprising in that regard.
Right. Michele, customer experience is not ancillary to you. It's in your title. It is your mantra, and it's your world. Personalization at scale. That has to speak to you. We have to deliver quality with automation to probably get towards that. How do you read this? How do you read this page here?
I think for me, automation, and specifically for us as OneAmerica as a record keeper, a lot of it is similar to what Jamie said on the cost structure. But I think the other piece for us, since we do have multiple systems, we have different platforms, automation is a way for us to streamline a lot of that work to reduce the cost per participant, or cost back to our plan sponsors. And so the more that we can automate by using, RPA, robotics technology, or starting to look at AI, that's really going to, help on the cost structure standpoint. But I think the other piece for us is we streamline and we simplify a lot of our underlying platforms, technologies that we use, it's going to be easier for us to understand where our customers are coming in and interacting with us, where they experience pain points with us, so that we can really create those differentiating moments for them, or those moments of truth, to really build and create an experience that is meaningful for them, as they interact with us and we move forward.
Yeah. So actually, if I look at all the ones that are the big bubbles, right, I think it's an interesting thread, right? Some of the opening context that Jamie said of, the industry has a lot of legacy systems. So as we pivot to client focus and client experiences, and think about, with what COVID has done over the last year, right? I mean, you're getting a physical signature through walking up to your plan administrator and getting a physical signature is a real difficult thing, right? So as you digitize that, you're like, okay, how do I make sure this is secure? Now this is all PII information, right? And the only way I can continue to do this at scale is by automating some of my core capabilities, right? So I think I see that as an interesting thread across the problems, but I'm not at the same time surprised to see the difference of challenges that we have in the industry, right? It is interesting that everybody's truth is slightly different, but we are all sailing in the same boat. To me, I find that very interesting to see how those connect together. VC, do you want to kind of elaborate from your perspective how you see this?
Yeah, I think many of the things, there are a lot of dots connecting these various terms. And from my perspective, actually, what is interesting, since we spoke about the customer experience, I think customers, if you really look at, I've been following the sponsor survey and the participant surveys that have been published over the years. Even after a lot of self-service has been made available, I think the self-service adoption is poor. There is a lot of scope to improve upon that, because still a lot of processing gets done at the provider end. And that is because I think, we have to really focus on the experience, building the experience for the user to be very compelling in a way that it is easier to actually do it themselves, rather than actually reach out to the, administrator or the provider end, or, CSR or whatever, right? So I think, and similarly, if you really look at the same automation, I think when a sponsor comes in, how easy it is for them to do a straight through processing, which actually eliminates a whole lot of time. They want to be efficient, and they want the system to be actually capable of that. And similarly, less hands at the provider end, less costs, and therefore greater savings. So I feel that AI, contributing to automation, building customer experience, all of them actually fit together to the whole to address the question of both the experience as well as the efficiency that we're talking about.
We also asked you a second question, which was this one. How quickly is your company able to adopt new technology? It's one thing to address, and we're going to talk about this as well, the resources, the challenges, the risks, if you will. But getting it done is itself its own thing. I was very surprised when I saw this. And by the way, thank you to the many dozens and dozens of you that did weigh in on this question here. Panel, does this track with your experience, or does it surprise you as well?
If I could take it, it is very encouraging to see that there's a lot of people who feel that it is somewhat quickly that they're able to adopt these changes. It is definitely a surprise to me that, I think we feel that we are able to adopt that quickly. One of the themes that we have seen at our company is when we think about agility and being able to integrate rather quickly, I think those are two themes that we have seen that have helped. I think why our employees feel more encouraged that they're somewhat quickly able to adopt newer technologies. However, being a regulated industry, that's kind of where, it was a little surprise that people are adopting that quickly.
Well, certainly our industry doesn't have a history of moving rapidly as an industry. We are a very, very large, slow boat to turn. And within that, of course, that it's always created opportunities for those who are more nimble more innovative, frankly. That speaks to technology. I know that in the last, I don't know if it appeared to you in the tag cloud, but challenges of legacy technology is an important and a real issue and continues to be. That's an anchor, if you will, not to beat up the ship metaphor too much more, but it's a drag on speed. And getting to your destination, of course, is one thing. Getting there in time may be everything, right?
Yeah.
That is, get to the right place, but get there too late, and maybe you missed the mark completely.
See, I think it's very interesting, and what we saw on the graph is not very different from what I expected, because we've been in the market for, the last, say, 15 plus years, intimately working with the retirement segment. I think we see a lot more of change, a lot more of openness and adoption to employing technologies today than what was before. And we see a lot of action out there. I think people are ready to explore.
Jamie, Michele, thoughts on this?
I was going to say, I was a little surprised by, I'm sorry, Michele, but just quickly, honestly, with having sat in a prior life, leading one of these businesses, myself and my team felt as if, things were never moving quickly enough. And it was always challenging. There were always pressures to, answer to client needs as well as drive costs down and so forth. I would say that I think RPA has come along. A number of firms have started to implement such things. I think mobile apps are being deployed by more, and they're finding faster ways of getting those things deployed. And I think people are probably feeling as if it is getting, on a relative basis, faster. So that would be how I would think about comparing those answers. But Ellen, to your point, and Michele, be interested, given you being on the inside of one of these providers right now, and as well as you, Anu, is it moving fast enough? In the eyes, we're seeing certain players obviously selling their businesses. We see other players really altering their entire operating model by partnering with large firms that have technology and BPO type capabilities. And so some of them, I believe, are deciding it's not happening fast enough and therefore have to do something about it. Others may feel it's moving fast enough for them, but I turn it over to you, Michele.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I echo your comment. I was actually surprised knowing at the speed in which we move, which hasn't been at lightning speed historically. But I will say that living the past year of COVID has taught us many things. And while coming in and leading customer experience, I also led our COVID response. And I will say, when you have something that you have to be focused on and be laser focused on, it's amazing how fast you can move with it. So I do believe some of that has happened around digital transformation for many companies in our industry. One, I think it's had to, just because of self-preservation. People had to make choices in order to make sure that they were reaching their customers effectively, keeping their book of business, keeping their clients, happy and informed on what was going on. So I think for me and living it and watching it, so many companies had to make the shift because you had no choice but to do it. It'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. I do believe that it will. And I think with the additions of automation and RPA over the last several years, some of the foundational ecosystems that have come into play to make it much easier to do straight through processing and connect many of the internal systems and legacy systems that we have, and make that leapfrog jump versus doing those incremental improvements. So while I think, we still have our own internal challenges with resources, with priorities, I do think that along with the rest of the industry, we're well on our way, and I think we all have to be.
Right.
Let's ask our audience a question. We have 3 poll questions. If we have time, we'll try to get to them. The first, if we can bring it up here, asks the question, which of the following, you've seen the topics here, is most important to get right in the next 12 months? Cyber, AI, machine learning, blockchain, not so much. And in fact, by the way, I would tell the audience in reverse as a discussion, as we prepped for this, we thought about it. Is it topical? Yes. Do we have a whole lot to say about it at the moment? Not really, in terms of understanding its applicability, and if so, what it's going to take. There's a lot yet to understand where it may fit, but not a huge surprise here, is it, panel, as far as these are concerned? We also want to talk about, social media and customer experience in particular, and I didn't ask it, in here. This is certainly the technology of this side of it. We'll go ahead and close this, but a really good place to continue the chat from here. Let's talk about cyber. Certainly, it's a priority to get right. Based on your experiences and where you're driving projects today, or where you're observing, what are the right questions in terms of making this chat actionable to those joining us? Not just to talk about our direct experiences, but what would you want them to know about it? What are the right questions to ask? What are the right ways of, I think, of framing it? What are the essential things that companies have to get right now to make this successful? Anu, you want to start there?
When we think about cyber, I think the biggest part that you have to accept is it is one of those things that you'll have to continue dealing with from here on outwards. It's not something you're done. It is a journey. You continue to evolve. So for most organizations, it is always a challenge saying, I need to get the cybersecurity thing in, but this competes with customer experience, right? So that is the balance that is very difficult to achieve. And to me, that in combination with how you deal with fraud on the back end is going to be the critical pieces that you want to get right. So thinking about cybersecurity or fraud as a holistic concept that you want to apply across all touch points. I think that's going to be a key thing. And again, I can't reiterate that, when you think about cybersecurity, AI and the cloud has given us new tools that actually simplify how you can implement this. Current customer experiences are actually enabling simplicity and have trained the users. Like two-factor authentication when it started was a very tough pill to swallow for most consumers. But once Google, Apple started adopting it, it became much easier to have a conversation saying, this is similar to what you do with Google when you're trying to do a transaction. And it made it easier. Michele, feel free to elaborate. I know you're dealing a lot with customer experience. So.
I think the keys for us is how we set up, how we're going to collect data through all these customer interactions that we want to track along the way. How we set up that foundation with cyber and with our fraud team is absolutely going to be critical. And for me, those are some of the first things that, people need to be thinking about, because it's going to make that journey easier along the way. If you miss some steps, it can cause some brand reputation issues if your customers believe that their data is at risk, especially financial data, your retirement data. that's my money for the next life. So for us, as we're looking at cyber, and we've got a great team within OneAmerica that is looking at this for us. Everything from ensuring your associates understand how to recognize phishing, to how to secure their own data on their laptops, to how we need to secure data, not just in our internal systems, but in the cloud as well. That's really set us up to do the things that we want to do in the future as we start to head down that path of getting to that 360-degree view of our customer base.
Yeah, so I would agree. I think that 360 view, if I can riff off of that for a minute, Michele, for cybersecurity is critical. Absolutely. I think the key here is trust. You undermine trust, then your ability to be able to engage and serve customers is going to be set back, maybe permanently in that regard. But I think if we connect this to social media and non-profile related, non-transactional data, but data about individuals to be able to create context associated with their circumstances, to be able to motivate them to the types of behaviors we want them to take on for their betterment of their future, is going to be very critical on the ability to bring in data that is from outside of the system in order to be able to drive those meaningfully. And a lot of, obviously, the retail environment does that today. But if we can't convince sponsors from a cybersecurity point of view that we're actually driving the right security, we will not be given that permission to engage that way. We'll undermine our ability to be able to deliver that trust. So cybersecurity is going to be a core foundational capability that I believe we have to be able to deliver in the industry to earn the right to be able to deliver the types of 360-degree perspectives, Michele, that you were talking about. Otherwise, I think we lose the right to do that.
Now, interestingly, I was, I think I said it so nicely in terms of balancing, competing thing about the usability and experience vis-a-vis the safety and security aspect of it. And I think as we are really exploring the next generation of usability, one of the key things is about integration with a whole lot of collaborative tools. And that actually brings in a different level of challenge in terms of the cybersecurity part of it. And I think the biggest challenge, I think the industry has handled, there's been sufficient technology and it has handled the security part on the server side, as well as the data goes through the network, through the various mechanisms. But I think the challenge at the edge of the network continues to be a big one. And I think, as Anu said, it's not going to stop. We just have to keep working on it.
If I could add, VC, I think there's a question, I think in the questions that relates to this is, and I'll give it my perspective, is what is the economics of cyber investments? It's one of those where, to Michele's point earlier, gets to become a brand and it impacts your long-term business. So it is a cost of doing business in current world. And to me, it's very similar to what mobile was in probably 20 years ago, where people were like, oh, I need a mobile service, and that was a differentiator. Now, if you don't have a mobile service, you're not playing in the business. So cybersecurity is one of those things that I believe is something that is the cost of business. And also it is how you change the culture of your employees that are servicing across the company. It is not just the consumer behavior, but your internal employee experience as well.
Thank you, Anu. And in fact, we have a couple of questions from the floor that speak to this in particular, and I'll speak back one of them. What is the economics of cyber investments? Since this is an ongoing cost, is this a business investment that companies need to absorb, or is there a way to recoup via customer pass-throughs?
They should probably think about this as a cost of doing business, but I think they look at it as something they just have to do. I'm not sure they're not necessarily bringing that forward into their client conversations meaningfully to help then earn the right to be able to do more for participants, to gather more data. It's whether or not you're talking to your clients about your cybersecurity capabilities, those investments that earns you the right to then work and engage the individual employees of that customer meaningfully. And so can you charge for it as a pass-through? Probably not. The bank doesn't charge you for their cybersecurity when you're a customer there. So I see that as unlikely, but the question is, can you leverage it as a means to enable your business through the conversations with your clients, either to retain them and subsequently also to help motivate them to allow you to engage them more deeply than they currently allow you to do so. And cybersecurity I see as being a key factor in allowing that conversation to be enabled.
I think we're all talking about trust, right? It underpins all of this, underpins everything that we do in this industry, without which we have no relationship. And Jamie, I think that's certainly where you're going, that if we can maintain that, we earn the right, we earn the opportunity to introduce other ideas where we may make money. We may be able to recoup in indirect or just simply other ways, but not directly. Does adoption of technology and enhanced consumer experience depend on how well all the technologies are interconnected in the ecosystem? For instance, for a medical exigency, I would like to have a card from my 401k that I can swipe at approved providers or physicians or hospitals for an approved procedure. I don't have to go through the painful process of withdrawals and disbursements and so on. Any comments on that? That's an interesting question. Michele, you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that one. That's the exact experience that we're starting to look at, and how to make that a reality. It's in our view for something that we believe is going to come to fruition in the next 7 to 10 years, because we're already starting to see requests from it. Even on the life side of our business, we're starting to see people say, I have a medical, I want my premiums because I'm taking care of myself to go down, and I can prove it to you. So this ease of doing business that is very Amazon-like is what we're starting to see emerge. And so I think that ecosystem and how we set that up is absolutely going to be critical, so that you know where your customer is at every part of that chain, and the handoff you're receiving to the handoff that you're giving on the next step in that business process has to be very transparent and seamless for you to know exactly where they are and what they're doing and what they receive on the other side. So something absolutely we're starting to look at, because I do think it's going to be something that our customers are going to start asking for.
And I would say, in terms of the example of the card and being able to swipe, there's, that starts to get into whether or not the 401k plan is going to be geared towards enabling people to spend, or is it an accumulation vehicle? And this is not as much technology as it is, well, maybe it's technology enabled. There's a lot of work that needs to be done relative to how sponsors think about the investments that are offered to these individuals. They start to be able to spend, and how do they construct their menus? Obviously, right now, these vehicles are not positioned to be cash, positions today. But if we want them or believe that that's the best place for them to be staging their spending out of, we need to be creating different mechanisms by which to enable that. So yet to be determined, I think, if that's the objective. But that experience could be enabled, but there's a lot more that would need to be done to make that happen.
Saving and spending speaks to wealth and health and the bridge to HSAs, which is another 3-hour conversation, which we won't get to this afternoon. But obviously technology enabled, but to your very good point, Jamie, it's a matter of framing what the system wants to do and what we decide are our priorities to manage. VC, I'm sure that when Michele mentioned an Amazon type experience, that rang bells for you, because I know that that's kind of near and dear to how you think about customer experience as well, in terms of thinking about these ideas. Would you like to pick up a bit?
Absolutely. Actually, I think as Jamie said, even in the previous thing, I think technology exists for doing some of those, and some of it has got to do with the policies and processes that have to also come in to play. From a user experience perspective, I think there is a lot that has got to happen, particularly with reference to the industry, because I think the way the industry has developed, and it was more like a back-end record-keeping system serving it, but I think it was not designed for end users and the consumers to actually interact. And over a period of time, investments have been put in the front end to develop. I think what is happening is, at the same time, the users are actually becoming more and more smarter with their devices, and the proliferation of these devices in their hands, and the kind of plethora of consumer applications which are there, is creating a new usability grammar completely, actually. And therefore, the enterprise apps like what we are talking about in the entire industry, if it is not going to catch up, it's going to frustrate the users more and more. So therefore, there is, I think, a very active case to really look at how do we get that new cognitive behavior in the users to actually be leveraged for driving efficiency, driving usability, driving down costs, and things like that. So I think those are some of the areas which is very interesting to talk about, and we do a lot of research and investment in that area.
Thank you. VC, I'm going to ask you to continue for one more moment. We had a question from the floor a little bit ago. As we mentioned, we kind of flew by. We had a polling question earlier that included, blockchain, and it doesn't appear to be high on the radar of many, or not certainly on the priority list. In fact, there is a question, to just please explain blockchain, and I'll ask you to do it, and if you would briefly, in context as to if it has merit and if it has applicability in terms of the technology of retirement plans. How do you envision that becoming useful? And what would be important for companies to understand about evaluating blockchain before they went down that path?
See, I was actually participating in one of the webinars in the Spark Forum, and the speaker was, if they say that what are the two really big things happening to the retirement industry, I think she was talking about AI, ML, and the blockchain. And I think from the financial services industry, it is beginning to be adopted in a fairly big way. And a lot of applications are coming out there. I think the biggest, one of the problems that we have is in terms of rollovers, right? If participants move from one thing, and we don't have the custodians connected to each other, and transferability of their savings. And, this is really a long, fairly intensive process from a user perspective, as well as from a provider perspective. And some of these things can be addressed by blockchain related systems, which are coming, where you get an ecosystem which is collaborating very closely. I think what is blockchain? Blockchain is particularly, has adopted, apart from the apart from the cryptocurrencies, the big thing that is happening in the industry is particularly in terms of the ledgering part of it, which gives you a couple of really, really solid reasons why we should look at it. One is really the security part of it, in terms of how secure the information is out there. The second part of it is immutability, and more importantly, democratization of data. Like today, actually speaking, the data is residing in islands, and then it's very difficult for people to actually reuse it. A lot of data management challenges come out of that. And blockchain gives you a mechanism whereby it is democratized. It can be initially in a private setting with specific set of users actually collaborating in a private ecosystem, or it can be federated larger ecosystem. So I think it gives you a way in which you can start collaborating with each other, where the overall experience of the sponsors and the participants are far more taken care of. So in our conversations, I think the adoption of blockchain is not going to be quick and easy as far as this industry is concerned. I think people need to understand the application of some of this, or how it is going to play out. And it's not going to be like one giant blockchain application for the industry. There are going to be partnering applications, like, on the trust side, or on the trading side, and things like that. So I think as they mature, you will find that I am fairly confident that there will be adoption here. From our side, we are working on the participant ledgering, in terms of making sure that you have a gold source of data, participants can quickly see it, and providers can actually easily put the data so that the participants have richer data available to them. So it's more like a technology demonstrator. We do not know how this will go, but we are very passionate about exploring the technology from a being future ready point of view.
Do you see AI driving more than participant experience, say, for example, payroll? In other words, learning how to do payroll based on experience of payroll processed versus needing to build APIs or other integrations, one example. Another question on this topic that's come to us: if you could share advice regarding key best practices that would enable businesses to maximize benefits from their investments in RPA or AI, what might those be? That's an interesting way of kind of walking into this chat. Jamie, why don't you start us here?
So I'll just step back. The first question, I think, was really about, does it extend beyond experience? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think it's a combination of experience, but also in terms of enabling straight-through processing, right? I mean, the ability to be able to read forms that are handwritten or not standard around withdrawals, around loans, whatever it may happen to be, and allow those to be loaded onto a mobile app or via a mobile app, be read without somebody having to take a look at them and adjudicate whether or not they are saying what they're saying, and being able to enter that data into the system and execute the transaction without a back office person having to be involved in it. You know, there's an experience component to that, which speeds it up, but there's a tremendous amount of cost savings associated with that type of application of AI and machine learning. And I think that is the experience is going to be enabled again through the speed of that transaction, as opposed not to having to go through, you know, stage gates in terms of approval processes and then questions, et cetera, and allowing things to move right through to the back and the transaction being processed. But it has simultaneously, it's got a tremendous cost savings to the vendor, that they don't actually have to deploy somebody to be doing something which is relatively repetitive and not particularly value added if a machine can do it right off the bat. So I think it's hand in hand, both. And I'll leave others to talk to the last question, but to address the first one.
I mean, taking off from Jamie, specifically when we were looking at AI/ML bots, we were dabbling with a lot of data that we were really having, and one of the areas where we were focusing at the time was a lot on contribution processing with the payroll data coming in, and we found that actually the amount of time that it takes for the corrections to make sure that errors don't get into the system and get thrown out of the record keeping side of things is how do we actually make sure that it is efficient in terms of correcting the data. So we said, hey, listen, I think there's a lot of data that has come in the past, and we also know people have corrected it, and the corrected data have gone into the system. Can we really look at patterns based on specific sponsors, payroll cycles, or specific employee groups? Where does the errors come? I mean, is there a pattern to it? So we did a deep learning model as far as that is concerned. We have our first bot developed with that kind of an idea where it can, even without coming into any of the system, it can actually, the learning model will be able to point out where precisely is a potential problem in the data and what could be the corrective action that you could do. So in other words, actually, it doesn't have to come through one full cycle to the provider and then get thrown as error to the user. The user should be able to actually get it seen even without getting processed at the provider end. So it actually pushes it back so that you get more cleaner data into the system. So that's a fairly cuts down the turnaround process as well as the cost associated with it.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the one point, right, in terms of how do we prove out the value of these AI or bots, right? It's like everything else. Start with a simple hypothesis. Given the cloud, the technologies and the sandboxes that are available, you should be able to prove out something relatively quickly and start with something small that is repetitive, that adds no value to your core business, right? And then you'll quickly learn from that, and then you can apply it to broader spaces. If you start with something critical, the pressure is going to be so high that failure is not an option, and that may set you back. So the choice of where you're focusing for that, I think, is important. And then start with a very small hypothesis and test and learn from it.
I agree with Anu. That's really where we started on our RPA journey, and we're starting to look at AI right now. But for our quick wins and successes, that's exactly what we did. We started with small problems that we knew we could fail fast on, and show and prove that we could be successful in those spaces. I think the problem comes in when you try and go too big, too fast, or you're running too fast, and you're trying to deal with something that is so complex in nature that it's really hard to show the benefit, and it's really hard to get to the end state very quickly. So for us, we thought big and we started small, and that's been a pretty good recipe for us for success.
I just noticed a question on the monolithic and mainframe platforms vis-a-vis microservices. I think the question, I mean, it's obviously in terms of building scale and bringing down the infrastructure cost from the mainframe MIPS to really more cloud manageable, either cloud or in-premise, and also the flexibility for you to scale horizontally as the demand grows and up and down. I think microservices has got tremendous ROI in terms of being able to manage your infrastructure costs as well, and also the ease of actually deploying software and quick releases and updates and everything. I think we are a great fan of microservices. Our current version of the product is on microservices. Happy to share that.
Just to expand on that, right? I think most providers, right? I think like every other place, providers are going to become more of the customer experience creators, and that's what is going to be theirs. Versus the providers are mostly going to move towards SaaS, and the way you make that work is enabling those capabilities as microservices. So right. Yeah, that's where we hope the industry is going, and we are already starting to see that with some of the top providers as well. I know Congruent also has been going down that path. The other part that I don't think we touch on much is the efficiencies gained from a cost standpoint as you deploy AI and these capabilities into how you architecture solutions. The efficiency of running the technology operations of that record keeping system also, is significantly higher. So it's a lot more efficient system where you have alerts saying, okay, this is going wrong versus this has crashed, right? So I think just from that perspective, AI can be very helpful in solution providers as well, where they're enabling these capabilities.
I want to end with one more poll for the audience, and I want to ask each of you very quickly to react as to what it tells you. Which is your organization's greatest constraint to making progress on technology challenges? Is it limited resources, clarity on goals, or competing priorities? There may be any number of things, but I'm asking you if you were to constrain that to these three, which of them is really the one that's going to weigh in most heavily on your ability to be successful in addressing technology challenges like we're talking about today? Limited resources, competing priorities. Really the dominant answers here. I'm not asking you to say whether that surprises you or not. What does it tell you in terms of a takeaway that you would like folks to think about in terms of how would you advise them in a few moments to say, if I'm in your shoes and I have limited resources and competing priorities, and I have really mission critical challenges that are technology based to address, what would you have them think about? What would you have them do? Jamie, starting with you.
Yeah, I think not surprising that the goals are well known. I think all the competitors in the marketplace actually understand the goals they need to achieve. And when I look across, while there's differentiation in what value proposition they want to bring, the goals have a lot of commonality. I mean, the industry has common problems. But what I've found, at least just personally, just in my past career, and when I look at organizations, the challenges are ensuring that the decision making is decisive and communicated well relative to what the priorities are. And I think that I find organizations often, because they're very large, those priorities are not as commonly held as maybe some senior management teams want to believe. Maybe they have been decisive, but it hasn't been communicated well, or maybe there is a need to sit back and actually be more decisive around those decisions and then do the communication. But it's about deciding what is absolutely the most important things to do now and being laser focused on it. I think, Michele, your comment on what COVID proved was an excellent example of you can get things done quickly, but you've got to decide that that's what's most important. And that's I think we all in our own lives, right? It's not just an industry issue. I think we all face that as well.
Michele, quick thoughts.
To piggyback on that, Jamie, I think the other piece that I would add is that having the ability to be laser focused, but also challenging yourself to think outside the box. Think about trying to get to that goal in ways that may not seem logical. And I think that's what we found living through COVID is that we came up with solutions that in a normal environment, we probably wouldn't have challenged ourselves to get to. So those wacky ideas or those one-offs ended up being probably you know, our greatest wins because one, we were decisive, and two, we didn't let perfection be the enemy of the very good. In order to get things done and to think about ways and how we would do it that we traditionally never would have thought about before. So that innovative, that thinking, that design thinking, that out of the box thinking, especially when you have limited resources, it is absolutely key for me.
Yeah. And to expand on that, I think focused with that, right? I think if you thin slice your problem, so you build your hypothesis, prove it out before you build the whole thing. I think that's going to be a key thing, because I don't know that I've worked at any place in my career where you have unlimited resources and no competing priorities. So that'll always be a challenge. So the more you can thin slice, you'll start to get the value that'll help you reinvest into your business.
And just to add to that, in the current environment where there is so much of componentization and standards, I mean, there are really, really a lot of interesting products available out there. It's no longer that you sit and have to develop everything from scratch. Actually, it's become an integration rather than development. So actually fewer resources, but really smart resources are going to make a huge difference in terms of actually achieving more.
And on that note, I thank you, VC. Thank you, Mandava. Thank you, Michele. Steele. Thank you, Jamie McInnes. This has been a terrific discussion, technology challenges and trends. I suspect we could do this weekly for a long time and not get through everything. But in terms of illuminating these topics and suggesting pathways towards best practices, I hope our audience has found this productive and useful. We will record, and as we are recording, we'll offer a replay of this for anyone who wishes to share it. And we look forward to seeing you again on another expert conversation with Congruent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.